that he felt old when he was, a minute ago, and I just thought, just stop it, David, just stop it. But this is going to be an awesome match, and we have some moves, David.
Yeah, and it's the Queen's Gambit accepted. This is an acceptance of the gambited pawn. It's just a temporary sacrifice by white. The white c-pawn has disappeared. Magnus can regain that pawn back. He will gain it back. But this is something Levon's been doing throughout the last few months. It's quite a new addition to his opening repertoire. Surely Magnus is prepared. Magnus just taking a pause there, pushing his pawn forward. White's light squared bishop is going to come out now and gobble up that pawn again. So the gambited pawn has been regained. And still very standard stuff. This is a very well-known position. Tens of thousands of games, if not more, have occurred in this position throughout chess history. And Magnus even had this position earlier in the tournament as black. So what will he do now? Plenty of moves. White can trade a set of pawns. White can bring a knight out, push some pawns himself. Lots of options.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see what he's going to play. I've noticed it's very trendy at the minute to actually not touch the knight on the left side of the board and instead to focus on developing the dark square bishop.
Yeah, White needs to, at some point, bring those three pieces to life on the left flank, and Black needs to do the same. Black needs to get castled. Sometimes, in this type of position, if we imagine White's pawn in the centre trading off the Black's pawn, those pawns disappearing, the queens would be staring at each other. Sometimes those disappear. Actually, Black's king is not that bad in the centre. But, yeah, it's hard to call. It depends on Magnus's mood, I feel, right now. If he wants a quiet first game just to warm up, then we might see White capture the Black pawn. If he wants maybe a more tense game, he'll develop one of those pieces, as Jovanka mentions. Simon, how about yourself? Any experience in this variation?
Well, we see a move there played, but the only experience I can recall recently is that David, I remember I mentioned that position a second ago to you, and I said I've always struggled a little bit on the white side of this, and you recommended a plan that I should play, which I've totally forgotten now. but I know it wasn't this bishop move. It's something to do in the centre, a very aggressive plan, but I don't want to give away my prep anyway. It's nothing to do with my bad memory.
Yeah.
But the move played is kind of is really sort of just waiting to see what Black's going to do, because Black normally advances his pawn majority on the queen side, and White's bishop, light squared bishop, is quite well placed to meet that now. So it's keeping the pieces on, which I'm personally happy to see, and we see this advance now occur, and White often tries to get his light squared bishop attacking the rook in the corner. That's one idea I know, but maybe it's not so easy to do. And OK, this is interesting, just pushing forwards in the centre, David.
Very aggressive, actually, and I must admit, I've seen this position briefly before, I think, but I'm not familiar with the ins and outs. Both of them playing very, very fast. Pressure now on the white knight, and it's a race. Essentially, if Black can get castled, if Black's king can... if the bishop can come out and then the king can run away to safety, Black is doing very, very well. OK, we see a trade of knights, first of all. But Black is still 2 moves away from doing that, and White has those 2 tempi, 2 moves to create some nuisance, and he starts by undermining this Black pawn. It's eyed up twice now, the pawn and bishop, so it has to commit. It pushes forward. Now, however, there is a outpost for one of White's pieces. The white bishop can land here, the white knight can land here, and long term it's going to be hard for Black to challenge for this square. For example, say White pushes a pawn and then plants a bishop on this square. It's just going to be a great piece long term. I wonder what Magnus has got in mind now. White's problems in this position are his bishop. This bishop mainly, where's it going out? I don't really see it. There is an idea, I guess, to sacrifice a pawn and push forward in the centre, but that needs to be well calculated or well prepared.
And I have some information on that particular pawn push that you highlighted, because Levon Aronian has actually played this exact position with the white pieces. And he did sacrifice the pawn, as David highlighted, and he actually won that game. It was in 2014.
Okay.
Now, what is the betting that Levon remembers? This game that he played with
From the white side.
From the white side.
And who was his opponent?
His opponent was Ruslan Ponomaryov, and it was a blitz match in Beijing.
What, could Magnus remember that game?
Unlikely, right? Because it's a blitz. Because you tend to filter out those type of games, and you think, well, that might not be so relevant. But I wonder whether Levon Aronian has a kind of photographic memory of his own games, because I can tell you I don't, and often I've forgotten. And sometimes I go back to the database and I'm like, oh my goodness me, I just played into a game, which was my own game, and I played brilliantly, but now I didn't play brilliantly.
But Jovanka, that's why you know, these guys are sitting there and we're sitting here, I'm afraid. I mean, because I have the same problem. Maybe David doesn't, but I'm like, yeah, my memory's a bit of a sieve nowadays. I mean, it's not that bad, but compared to these guys, they have an incredible memory, it seems, right? I mean, like, I know Magnus can recall games from hundreds of years ago in really bizarre events, and their recollection of games is just it's another level. So I wouldn't be surprised if they both know about this game. Wouldn't surprise me anyway. So yeah.
Yeah, there's different types of memory. The top players, they tend to remember by experience. Magnus, if he remembers a game from hundreds of years ago, he'll remember, oh, I was reading this one book this one time and it was on this page, which is already freaky to me. But most players, they're like, oh, I remember feeling a certain way about this position, and I think this was the move. And it might not be a kind of complete memory, it might be a bit of a blur, but I'm pretty sure Aronian, maybe we have to ask him later, but I'm pretty sure Aronian will have some recollection, at least, of this position.
Yeah, I mean, he's moving so quickly that he's certainly prepared this position. It's in his memory somewhere. So I'm not so sure about Magnus. And I mean, the move that you suggested there, Ivanka, looks very logical to me. You're trying to get your last piece into the game by freeing it up. You're trying to do something before black can castle. Do remember, white's castled. It takes black 2 moves to get castled, so you should be trying to like home in on your opponent's slight weaknesses, and this is a weakness. You know, the king could be a target if we can open it up. So it seems like a very logical move to me, that pawn push. I mean, if he doesn't do that, I expect the game will it will be quite equal. I don't see why black should be any worse if he can castle. It's more Magnus maybe to do some manoeuvring though, like that, maybe moving the knight around. You know, he prefers a slower game, so maybe that pawn push in the middle is not really his style in this position.
It would be a sacrifice, so it would be very brave. Black can just take this pawn, and I'm not sure exactly how white follows up. Maybe bring the bishop out, getting some time against the queen, but then this would involve another pawn sacrifice. The black queen could come and take a pawn. So this is the type of thing going through Magnus's mind right now. He's weighing up the risk factor. If he gives away 1 pawn, 2 pawns, yes, he gets his pieces out. Yes, the black king is still stuck in the center. It's a target, but he needs to be 100% sure before he sacrifices anything. And if he's new to the position, as Simon mentions, maybe it'll be his instinct, rather than push a pawn forward and be brave and kind of gamble slightly, he will play a developing move. We didn't expect this.
I have to say, that is I mean, I can see the point behind it, but that is the least expected. I've never, ever...
Even I think that looks strange.
It is strange. It is really strange. I mean, like, what a move, you know? I mean, it has logic, but...
What is logic? Then please show.
Well, I think yeah, well, David can show, I guess. Here.
I mean, you're right, Kaya. Normally, rooks develop kind of across the board and then they go up. But here he's developing it up 1 square because the rook was actually on this diagonal that the queen sits on, and he wants to push the pawn next. So, for example, if black develops, getting ready to castle soon, then white will push a pawn forward. And if the rook was still on its starting square, the queen could come down, swoop down and take it. But that's no longer possible. And actually, the rook might develop this way to attack.
So actually now it's looking kind of good.
Now it's looking good. It's a swinger, Simon, as you call it.
It is a swinger, and I did check the database to see if anyone had ever come up with this kind of unusual idea, and someone did.
Wow.
And in fact, the reaction from black was actually to castle queenside.
Wow.
But...
Love it.
Yeah.
I really,
It's a little bit open. But
come on, do it. Do it, Lev. Do
I was thinking, you know, maybe if you don't want to gamble like that, maybe you could kind of get the best of both worlds and put the rook there instead,
but
and leave the king for the other side.
I mean, one thing we talked about, I think, throughout this competition and other competitions is how do you beat Magnus? You know, and the way to beat Magnus is to go complicated. Try to castle on opposite sides of the board, attack him. I would be like, you know, oh, he hasn't done it. I'd be like, you know, if you want to beat Magnus, you've got to try to unbalance it. So, I mean, I was just hoping he castled, but a much more simple move on the board, right? Yeah.
Is that the castling no longer relevant?
Are you trying to make me lose another bet? I lost one yesterday. So
we should have a bet. Who's going to choose queenside? Who's going to choose kingside? And who's going to choose nothing at all?
I'll go kingside. That's right.
No, they're tricking you, Kai. Don't take the bet.
No. I'm just resting on my, what do you say, laurels?
Yeah.
From yesterday.
Nice glass of wine coming.
Yeah. Unfortunately, after, for example, a knight trade, and if white continues with this plan and pushes a pawn forward, unfortunately here it's illegal to castle this way. Because you can't castle through check. Here the king would go through a square that's covered by the white queen, so you would have to spend a move preparing. But for example, you could bring your bishop out, threatening a checkmate on this square. This pawn is not protected sufficiently. White could, for example, block. And now this would be the type of scenario where we have the question. I think Simon's right. Most likely it'll be kingside. It just feels safer with 3 pawns protecting the king over here. Perfectly protected here. But if he's feeling really fruity, really brave, this move gets the rook in the game immediately, staring down at the opponent's queen, and the king isn't that bad, I guess, if you tuck it away closer to the corner. So still some big decisions ahead. But the clock times do indicate that Magnus is not comfortable. Levon, he's definitely in his comfort zone.
Yeah, 6 more minutes for Levon. Magnus is down to less than 9 minutes. What does this tell us about Magnus? Is he completely out of prep and looking for something?
Freestyling, I think, already. Magnus was familiar with the first few moves, I guess, but maybe he just didn't expect this specific opening today. Levon does play a few things against the queen's pawn opening nowadays.
I think he's been out-prepped, hasn't he? I mean, in this game, I think it's clear, just looking at the clock times, looking at the confidence, looking at the position even, it seems to me that, again, Black, I can't see why Black has any problems here. I mean, like, space advantage, easy development. I'm not saying Black's better, but when you're, the first thing you do with the Black pieces is try to equalise the game. And then after you equalise, then you can try to get the advantage. And, well, we see him continuing his plan here.
Yeah.
Yes, David indicated. Yeah, I agree with you, Simon. I don't think that Black is better, but, then again, that is the goal in the opening when you're playing the Black pieces. You just want to get a position where your king is castled, your minor pieces have great diagonals, and, well. We saw a checkmate being threatened and the pawn stepped forward to attack the queen. Now, that's quite a committal move, I think, because if Magnus manages to consolidate his pawns and is able to push those pawns, especially in the middle, then he probably has an advantage. But if he doesn't, then he's going to be saddled with a very weak pawn on e3.
Yeah, first he plants his bishop on this nice outpost that we talked about a bit earlier. This square that the bishop sits on can never really be challenged by any Black's pieces. And now it's decision time. Aronian is going to castle. There's nothing else really productive to do. It's just which side. I think both sides have pros and cons.
Sorry.
Probably more pros to castle king side, but on the right side.
I was reading that tweet from Don't Care. It made me giggle about a Black knight that was stranded and, had the cat. That was like, go on without me. I'll just be here. Nice one. And if you two want to send us a tweet, then you can do so using the hashtag #ChessChamps. Send us your pictures, your selfies, your questions, and we will try and feature them on the show.
Yeah, nice to hear your thoughts also on the drama going on and Magnus speaking yesterday. If you do hope Niemann will speak, we do love seeing everyone in the chess world get involved.
Yeah, and I think at this point every opinion is valid, right? I'm trying to reserve judgment until any statements are made by either player, but more information comes to light by the day. It's fascinating times.
Yeah.
And it's a typical Levon Aronian move. He is getting ready for a fight with some great opening prep in this game.
Yeah.
I think Lev's also won the wall game, hasn't he? I like his brick wall. I'm just like looking at brick wall. I thought, that looks so nice,
That's in St. Louis in the chess houses.
Is it right? Yeah. OK. And I'm looking at Magnus and think, maybe do your bed up next time.
It's kind of messy, actually.
You are on TV, mate. Just I'm sure you can afford a maid if you need to. So I'm thinking Lev's won the wall game at the moment, definitely, hands down. Hands down there. Yeah.
I've heard it's a good philosophy in chess to pretend you're a wall sometimes. Just anything the opponent throws at you, it's just going to bounce back. Just you're rock solid, like nothing can kind of destroy you, nothing can phase you. Just be a wall. Just
It's a good idea, isn't it?
be an immovable object.
I think you've said you will not pass, isn't that your one, your Venka?
Yeah, the
You know, that's,
Gandalf approach.
yeah.
But that's kind of much more passive. You know, I always kind of use it if, say, your opponent plays like very, very timidly and they're like literally from the beginning go, you're not going to pass. I'm going to just curl up into a little ball.
The
You'll never
Mourinho
get through.
parking the bus kind of chess.
Yeah, that kind of... I mean, but it can be very successful. And talking about openings, Mohamed Farah has a question for us. He says, if you had to play one opening for the rest of your life for black and white, what will it be? My question to you, Simon.
Well, I guess it would have to be, for me, the Dutch, and you can play the Dutch as white, which is called the Birds, named after Henry Bird. So I'd have to go Dutch opening, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it's that great, you know, all the time, but, you know, I'd have to pick something. David, what about you? I mean, can I guess?
You can guess, Simon. You know my opening repertoire.
I think a little bit Retty-ish, maybe.
Yeah,
you know,
that came to mind.
Yeah, I don't
Hippo?
know.
Yeah,
the hippo.
I was thinking
Oh, the hippo.
hippopotamus defense.
Yeah.
You can play it with white, you can play it with black. It's flexible.
Do you know what? That's a really good
good
call.
opening.
Yeah, the hippo, I think, would be up there with with the Dutch as well with me. Very good call.
I think I'd die of boredom if I had to play the Berlin every game. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was the issue. I was thinking, you know, for me, it would be quite obvious, would be the Caracal, but I'm like, do I want to play that for the rest of my life? And then I thought about it. I do play it. What am I on about? I literally, that is the only thing I play. So, yeah, so it would have to be the Caracal. With white... Oh,
Don't you have to play the same thing as white and black? That's what I thought it was. So
yeah, with white, I have to go with...
you have to go
one C3.
1C3. You have
What's
to.
that called?
Yeah.
Does it have a name?
Crap.
Language. We should have a language jar here on the...
Oh, yeah, that's true. £1 for every bad word. Yeah.
I'm glad nobody said the London system. That would have been instant...
But that's been, you guys talked about trends lately. London system must have been a trend because I feel that's the opening I've seen the most
Yeah.
on the tour.
It's always very popular, isn't it? At all levels, the London system. I mean, it's really popular at club level. It's really easy to learn. And it's popular at top level. So it's actually a very good opening. Yeah.
There's a lot of memes, though, which try to shame London system players because it's such a good opening. And meanwhile, Magnus is trying to go on the attack. Look at where the White Queen has placed herself. She's aggressively... well, she's basically declaring to the Black King that she wants to attack. And that Black King shuffled into the corner, out of the gaze of the White Queen. Now White's rook did indeed swing across. Not the most active square this White rook has just moved to, but he is, Magnus, now supporting the pawn in front of this rook. He wants to propel it forward, push it forward.
Why didn't it go to the D square instead?
You're right, Kai. I'm surprised as well.
Okay.
I think in this last position, so Magnus has just brought his rook across all the way to E2. But he had the option to move it to a different square. Right now, it doesn't work because you actually block your bishop's defense of this pawn, and this pawn would suddenly drop. The Black Queen would swoop down, and this wouldn't work if it wasn't check because White could win the Black bishop. But unfortunately for White, it is check. You have to waste a move, and then the Queen can kind of do a smash and grab and take a pawn and run away. So I was surprised, though, that he didn't prepare this. Magnus, for example, could have either defended this pawn first or moved his king into the corner and next tried to enter the open file. I think you're right, Kai. This is very natural. This is the best file on the board for the rooks. But Magnus wants a different plan. He brings his rook across. And this is why chess is so complex, so rich and full of possibility, because all these different plans, they're probably all fine. It's just choosing one, being consistent. And the plan now is to push this pawn forward if possible. I wouldn't be surprised if Levon either stops this plan by plonking his bishop in the centre. This bishop looks like it's doing a great job now of just controlling both sides of the board. And it stops that white plan, which is always nice. It's fun to kill your opponent's ideas. Or you could maybe push this pawn forward, hit the White Queen, also preventing White from ever pushing a pawn forward to the square. But this one is committal once the White Queen moves. Now White has a great diagonal for his bishop. My one fear for Levon is that White's bishop will land on this diagonal, the dark squared bishop, and the light squared bishop controls this diagonal. And that does mean trouble. That spells trouble for the Black King. So long term, Black has to be a bit careful, a bit wary in this position.
And it's very interesting on the clocks. Magnus almost 10 minutes down on the clock. I mean, spending that much time, should he sort of have a bigger advantage? I mean, the bar 0.2.
Yeah, ideally you want maybe a simpler position. This one is still really complex with all the heavy pieces on the board. So you want a simpler position if you don't have too much time. I'm always in time trouble myself, and I want to simplify things, make sure I can handle it even with a minute or two left. Or, as you say, Kai, you want an advantage, something kind of a safety net. But Magnus, he is known as a bit of a slow starter. The first game of the day, he's often just warming up.
And we did see a big yawn there. So
I don't know. You know, at first, I really liked Levon's position. I was like, oh, well, you know, he just plays one of those moves that David suggested. And I thought it's fine. But then I started looking at it and I was like, hang on a second. That dark square bishop that Black has, it's such a bad piece. And yeah, he's gone for that pawn push. But I didn't like this upon second thoughts because of this lengthening of the diagonal for White's dark square bishop.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, that piece is horrendous. And the other problem I can see here for Black, even if, you know, it's roughly even according to the computer, is that you really want to play, and this is a great tip, it's not just about the computer assessment. You want to play positions where you have an easy plan. You know, no matter what middle game, this is now into the middle game. You've got to know exactly what moves you're going to be trying to do for the next 5-10 moves. You want easy squares for your pieces to improve. You want easy plans. And White's got kind of easy-ish plans. I mean, he can move that bishop. He can take over the open file. And it's I'm just trying to think if I was in Lev's shoes, and this is a great way to look at positions, just what do you actually do? You don't have any pawn breaks. OK, Magnus hasn't got many, but the only plan I can see is what Lev's doing. Just try to put your rooks on the open file. But I can't see any way to improve that bad bishop of Black's. You know, how can you ever get that to a nice diagonal? I can't see any other pawn breaks. It just seems a little bit tricky to formulate a plan. I mean, saying that, also, I have to admit, Magnus's plan is not entirely clear to me in the long run here, but it's a strange position. You rarely get positions just with bishops on the board as well, so it's quite peculiar. I might be throwing the h-pawn up the board here if I was Magnus at some stage, trying to use this one to force some weaknesses in my opponent's position. But I don't know, maybe a little bit easier for White to play.
Yeah, exactly, a little bit easier, and that's all you need, actually, at any level, especially at the top level. You don't want your opponent to have a clear-cut plan, in rapid chess as well, and it's always nice to have some idea what you're doing. OK, the bishop steps back, clearing this path for the black rook. The black rook controls all these squares, but it's not coming in. And Simon, you predicted the future.
Well, great minds, you know what they say. So it's quite worrying when Magnus plays a move that I recommend, actually.
You and Magnus are basically twins.
Oh. And I think, yeah, OK, more exchanges. I mean, it's lots of things are happening very quickly, David, now, aren't they?
Yeah, wow, and look at this by Magnus. The bishops did just leave the board, and Magnus doesn't hesitate. He pushes forward. What's the idea here? This pawn can be captured.
Just take it.
Just take it.
Yeah, White will take back. This is a deflection tactic. The Black queen is overloaded. She has to protect this square. If she moves away and takes the white rook, then whoops, checkmate. The white bishop defends its queen, and the king is trapped in the corner. So, yeah, really interesting idea here. I guess after taking, the Black queen could just move, run away. I'm not sure where to. This square, maybe this square. But yeah, it's looking really dangerous for Black now, especially on this diagonal. It's so close to checkmate already, actually.
Wow.
But White just needs a bit more ammunition. Maybe you can shuffle this rook across and bring the rook to the 7th rank, crash through there. And we see Levon Aronian still upping, I mean, still so quick, so swift. This position is on the board, and will White decide to put his rook on this open file? To me, this looks the most natural, but I guess Black can defend against any infiltration with the rook. He can maybe retreat his rook or use his bishop to defend this square. Still in the balance. White's king is not entirely safe either, and Black's bishop at least has a target later in the game. This pawn is a bit weak.
Yeah, and I mean, now I can see a pawn break in the long term that Black has. And this is, again, when you're playing any opening, you've got to know your pawn structures. And there's a pawn on the what do we call it, Charles file now? I guess the Charles file. Charlie the cat's file, I think. Yeah, yeah, it's got to be after Charlie the cat. And at some point, that pawn coming forwards could be very powerful in an ending, just to get a passed pawn. But it does look at the moment pleasant for Magnus, right? Because there's beautiful bishop striking across the board. Yep. So be a little bit careful if you're Lev here.
Yeah, so this is the current position. Let's see what Magnus comes up with. I'm expecting this rook move, but plenty of choice.
And a great question I see on the screen by Abel. His 3-year-old kid is able to name the pieces, but doesn't seem to know how to move them. Any suggestions? 3 years old, that's a young kid.
Yeah, it is a very young kid. So I've had success with my nieces, not necessarily by kind of teaching them the rules or anything, because they're so young, but by making it a story and an adventure. And I really like the African way of kind of like naming the pieces. So instead of kind of like using war analogies, I mean, they just use the animals. And, you know, they talk about the rooks being rhinos, and I can't remember the other animals, but, you know, you could just have fun and use your imagination. And that's what kids need to do, you know. 3 years old is so young that I think it's okay to kind of bend the rules and just have fun, explore, you know. It's such a pleasure to be learning at that age.
I remember Henrik Carlsen told me that when Magnus was around that age, maybe 4 years old, he would play against Magnus and his sister. Magnus and his sister would have all the pieces, and Henrik would have the king and the pawn, I think. And he would still win.
Yeah.
Queening that one pawn he had, and...
I tried that. It didn't work. It absolutely did not work. They were like throwing the pieces at me. So, I mean, no, it was not a success.
Yeah.
So, you know, it didn't work in my experience, but, you know, yeah. You know, they're young.
Yeah.
Get creative.
But as an inspiration, even Magnus Carlsen has lost against only a king and a pawn with all his pieces. That's a nice image for all of us. And we did have some moves on the board, and Magnus has taken down under 2 minutes.
Yeah, so as predicted, Magnus moved his rook across. The 2 white rooks are doubled up nicely, but where are they going? They don't really have any great squares to jump into, I was going to say. I tempted fate, commentator's curse. This is a trick. He's trying to break through on the back rank, but there's no immediate threat. We should mention the trick here is that white's rook cannot really be captured, or it can't be captured twice at least. If you take white's rook, it looks like free bait, a free piece, but if you take it with the queen the second time, you get deflected away again from the key g7 square and checkmate. The king trapped in the corner, so you cannot run away with the black queen anywhere. Therefore, you shouldn't take the rook, you shouldn't touch it, and Levon just shuffles his king across. He's just asking, what are you threatening, Magnus? If you trade off my rook, I will happily drop the bishop back and recapture. And actually, black's bishop guards the key square now. It's all about this g7 square, I feel.
Yeah. And now there's a threat, right, of bishop takes pawn on the board.
I think the problem for Magnus might be that a lot of the endings, so if the queens come off, if pieces come off, are just going to be very bad for white here. So Magnus does have this pressure against the pawn. He's using his pieces well at the moment, but if you can imagine the queens coming off and you look at the pawns, I'm looking at white's queenside pawns and they look very weak to me. And I'd imagine in an ending, Aronian would have very good winning chances, actually. So it's kind of this short-term play that Magnus has against, I think, Lev's long-term play. But can Magnus keep this up? Can he keep the threats going? I don't see how he can keep this short-term play up. OK, he now comes to just nibble the rook. Another tactical move there. Yeah,
keeping an eye on this loose piece. Again, if... OK, the black rook moves, but again, if you grab white's rook, then the black rook falls, check. Next move, the bishop drops as well. So let's catch up with the game. Instead, black moved this loose rook, brought it down to the second rank, and we saw a trade of pieces. Suddenly, this piece is under fire. I'm expecting Magnus to plant that in the center of the board. You could make an argument for just kind of retreating it, tucking it away in the corner safely. He retreats it this way. Wow. I guess he wants to defend this somewhat loose pawn. But now, Simon, you mentioned this pawn break. It's going to come. Charlie, the c-pawn's going to advance. For example, if white does nothing.
Oh, look at the bar, you guys! Wow. Jumping up for Levon.
Yeah, maybe this is why. Maybe this pawn push. Maybe the rook's going to come.
Yeah.
Look at Levon stretching as well, flexing.
I think he's seen that he's got some chances. I mean, there's 2 very tempting moves there, and this is the kind of danger that I was mentioning. OK, white's initiative has kind of died down. There's not any tactical threats, and black on the queen side is very strong. I mean, black's pawn, quite near that rook, is not far away from queening. It's only 3 squares, and this is. I mean, losing with white in the first game is a big deal because, you know, winning with black against someone like Lev, not easy. And it's not looking good. I mean, Magnus has been uncomfortable throughout this game, I felt. He's never seemed comfortable at any moment during his game. and I think he's just getting outplayed, actually.
Feels like he's not fully warm yet. It feels like he's trying to play himself back into gear, and 1 minute on the clock against 10, and with a big disadvantage, and probably just losing a pawn for free. I don't really see why this pawn isn't dropping off. OK, Levon chooses the other option we mentioned, maybe even stronger. Now, look at this pawn. You mentioned it, Simon.
Yeah.
Bertie the B-pawn, or
Barry.
Barry the B-pawn, or Beth the B-pawn. Either way, this pawn is very strong, and it's only three squares away from promotion.
Do you think it's a good idea, like before a very important match like this, that you play some games? So maybe you could play Stockfish, you know, have some games, play 4, you know, just get into the right kind of rhythm, because Magnus has seemed a bit, like you said, he hasn't gone into gear, and that B pawn is so strong now.
Push it.
Just push it. I mean, I totally agree. You know, it's 3 squares from becoming a queen. You know, if you get another queen, it's game over, and this would be a very, very big start for Aronian in the match.
And what does White even do in the meantime? The Black King is super safe right now. It takes 2 or 3 moves to even create a threat against that Black King, and that Black pawn only takes 2 or 3 moves to promote. So it's a race, but it looks like Black is winning this race quite easily.
And he has all the time in the world to calculate the right moves, Levon. Is it now all about moving that B pawn? Would you move that B pawn already now in this move?
Yeah,
Yes.
I think you just have to make sure your king is guarded at all times or within contact with the Black Queen. But if that's good, push the B pawn. Push it towards its destination.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Just, I mean, I'm trying to look for ways that White can create counterplay. Magnus there shaking his head. He knows he's in big trouble on the board and clock. OK, Levon attacks the White Queen. This might be clever. I was going to say the only way White can ever break through to the Black King is to push the White F-pawn forward to try and open up lines there. Still needs a miracle. But right now, bigger dilemma, where to put the White Queen. She has to stay within touching distance of a bishop. The Black Queen is keeping an eye on that White bishop. So the White Queen has to go to a passive square, defensive square.
I think there's only 1 square, right, it can go to. And I'm thinking the G4 square, because if you step down to the F2 square, then the bishop gets out and looks quite unpleasant.
This is a deadly...
I love that English understatement there.
I'm so bad at this. I always do it all the time, and then I'm like, I don't
completely
do it.
losing, and it's like, you know, it's very English. Like, looks a little bit uncomfortable there. You know, it's like, yeah.
But now this is a check, and a really nasty check, because the king has to move. And again, you could, as Levon Aronian's doing, it's all about the pins today. This queen is undefended, so hit the bishop in front of it, and the bishop can't move. Otherwise, the queen will drop. How do you defend your bishop? If you have to defend it with a pawn, then suddenly the Black Queen swoops in and gets to the king. This wins because next move the rook will drop. How do you defend your bishop? Do you really have to put your rook behind it? White's pieces, he does this. White's pieces now, the rook and queen are completely tied down. Levon Aronian upping the pressure. Everything is targeted at this bishop right now.
And 8 seconds for Magnus.
And his position is creaking. Maybe he just has to throw caution to the wind, give something up, and try to initiate chaos. But as it stands, his position is dire.
Yeah, look at Levon, though. He's just trading off all the pieces. He gives a check. Next move, he'll take the rook, and then he's going to just push this pawn. He's got rid of all of White's attacking potential, and in this current position, is it time? Do you just push this pawn?
I mean,
you could give a check first. You could give a check.
He's got to be just a little bit careful of that move you mentioned earlier, right, David? If he can stop, White's got only one idea, and the one idea is to push that pawn, threaten checkmate against Black's king, and open up the queen to get to the back rank. You know, this is just the one move. So Lev, very wisely, he's got 10 minutes. Yeah. He's just got to find a way to stop that one idea. If he stops that one idea, he's got the pass pawn. That's the only pass pawn on the board, and that will become a second queen and win the game. So he's just got to think how to do that. Take your time now. You don't. OK, he doesn't bother. He doesn't even need to take his time. He's stopping that pawn from moving with actually what looks like a very clever move there.
I think this is good technique here. You know, he just guards the king, controls all White's checks, and instead... And then, you know, when he's done that, then he will focus on pushing the pawn. You know, you don't need to rush with it.
And he's going to go 1 pawn up. Magnus had nothing to do. You can't push this pawn forward. Any queen trade will lose for White because this pawn will just promote. So you can't trade queens. You have to drop back. And now you can just gobble up a pawn with a check.
I mean, it's not completely hopeless, I'd say, because, I mean, Magnus is known to be amazing with, well, everything, but with his queens, and there's always chances of some perpetual check in this kind of ending, so it's not completely over yet.
That's why I'm a big fan of just finding the king a good hiding place. And once you do that, then you can focus on pushing the pawn. For me, I would think that the h7 square looks like it could be safe.
Yeah, but White is threatening to go and win that very important B pawn we've been talking about. White's queen was threatening to go sit next to it with a check and then pick it off the board. So Levon, he's prevented most checks with that last queen move. But, OK, the white queen is coming in. The white queen wants to go up diagonally to the top rank, to the 8th rank, check that black king. White can hide.
Some chances.
Yeah, the bar is going a little bit down. You mentioned perpetual check, Simon.
Yeah.
If we do have any beginners out there, should we explain perpetual check?
Definitely, yeah. Perpetual check is if you repeat the same position 3 times at any moment during the game, then you can claim a draw because it's like basically showing that no progress is being made. Let's have a draw. So it's just repeating 3 times. And the way that White would love to do this here is by using his queen to attack Black's king. And then, let's say, we don't even need to show it on the board, but let's say the black king moves, you just repeat by checking it, and then you get your draw. And obviously, Magnus, being a pawn down, this is the kind of thing he's aiming for. With his last move, the queen is getting ready to try and attack the black king. So this is the one hope. Black's king is not completely safe. It only has 2 bodyguards in front of it, the pawns. It could do with like a 3rd bodyguard to stop those checks. So, there's a bit of work to do here. Yeah. Of course, it should be winning, but you've got to be accurate here. And Magnus, very, very good with his queens. Yeah,
it's actually really tricky. I'm trying to even find a move now for Black, but struggling. The idea is, well, a threat right now for White. If Black does nothing, if Black creates this ideal hiding place for his king, he wants to do this, as Jovanka mentioned. The problem is timing. This check hits the king, and when it hides, suddenly Black's best pawn is eliminated. If this B pawn is eliminated, Black's winning chances also disappear. Because in this position, no more passed pawns, 3 pawns versus 3 pawns, dead draw. So this is a really nasty threat, this queen check. And how do you stop it? If you're careless, go back, for example, to stop that check, suddenly the black king gets checkmated. So we could see a turnaround. Instead, Levon Aronian, of course, spots that mate in 1 idea. He gives a check. Another trap, if the king walked forward for White, then Black can trade off the queens. Check, and swapping off the white queen, but the king can go back, and it hides. And now Levon goes the whole way back, defending against any checks on this back rank, just keeping the black king safe for now. But Magnus, he's insisting he really wants this pawn. He's trying to get it. If you push it forward now, then again a check, and the pawn drops off. He's just making life difficult, Magnus, right now. The evaluation bar says it's winning for Black, but you still have to be really careful. You need to keep this pawn alive.
What a start to this quarterfinal match between Magnus and Levon. 1 game and 1 quarterfinal has already finished. It's a really bad start for Hans Niemann. With the white pieces, he lost game 1 to Liam Le. He will now have to make a comeback to take it to tiebreaks or even win the match. Very bad start for Hans Niemann. And Magnus as well, with the white pieces, struggling here.
Yeah, struggling, but the one thing I don't really approve of is how quickly Levon's playing. Yeah. He's got 7.5 minutes. As we mentioned, he had a winning position, probably still, but I mean, playing moves like this, where he's just allowed a check, just given up a pawn. Now White has a very strong passed pawn.
But the queen can go behind the pawn, and that's a straightforward plan. Beth is marching.
Yeah, but now it's a race. It does look very strong, actually, this last move. That black B pawn, how do we stop it?
It's a nice move there, because Black could have actually taken a pawn with check using a little sequence there, but doesn't go for it, because those pawns near White's king, completely irrelevant. In queen endings, it's all about having a pawn which is not obstructed. So if you get your queen behind that non-obstructed pawn, you just launch it all the way down, and it's true. I mean, Black has a very easy plan, and surely he's going to push the pawn now. Here it comes, 2 squares away. Just 2. That's not a lot.
Yes, I have a word. I have this expression I've taken. It's quality over quantity when it comes to pawns and endgames.
And life. Yeah, I think.
Life.
Do you know? Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I don't know. I believe in quantity. On and off the board. The more the merrier. The more the better. Greed is good.
Greed is good. They both have 3 pawns. So is it... And now Magnus is also moving his one upwards. Is it that one square that the black pawn is further up than the white?
Yeah, exactly.
That makes it the whole difference?
Yeah, it should do, but I mean, he can push the pawn again, and white will only have one move, and it's a really ugly move, which we'll probably see anyway.
Show it.
Yeah, but you've then got to find what to do next.
Yeah, black is about to promote, so white has to come back and block. So how do you get rid of this blockader? I guess one idea would be to bring the queen in. I'm not sure exactly where, but white pushes the pawn, the queen moves, white pawn pushes, and after a check, white is just in time to move the king, and it's important that this promotes, and it will be checkmate once white makes a new queen. And, OK, black hasn't gone for this. It looks like white was doing OK here. White's just in time with the race. Instead, if we go back, black didn't push his pawn. He just created some space for this black king. But that loses a valuable move. Now, will white start pushing this pawn on the next move? It's black's turn right now, but...
Great defence from Magnus, and I can see this heading towards the draw, because the thing is, if you remove the pawns on the left-hand side, which could easily happen, because white can use his pawn to distract black's queen away, it should definitely be a draw then. So I'd imagine he's going to move his pawn up, and he's trying to force the black queen to a bad square. And actually, even without, we get to some weird ending, even without white's pawns on the king's side, those positions can be drawn, even if you're 2 pawns up.
Wait a second. Magnus has just stepped his king forward, and that allows queen takes pawn check.
What is this?
I mean, I don't understand that.
Oh!
Why did he do that?
He just...
Why has he dropped a pawn with check?
And Aronian hasn't spotted it yet.
Well, I mean, take a pawn with check, come on.
It's not just a pawn with check, but when the king moves, the black queen comes in.
Yeah, he has seen it.
What's he done? Is he resigned?
He suddenly resigns, Magnus. Just a one-move blunder.
Oh, what a horrible start to the day for Magnus Carlsen. White